Okay. All right. So thank you guys for joining this talk with IES Cape Town about academic experiences that you had on your semester experience. I'm just going to quickly introduce the three of you to each other. You each know yourselves, but you do not necessarily know one another. So in terms of my camera, to my right is Carlos Lewis Miller, who studies at Case Western University. To his right is Michaela Scott, who studies at Villanova University. And to her right is Amir Dunstan, who studies at Howard University. I wanted each of you to join this talk because I think the three of you collectively have very interesting perspectives about your experiences in Cape Town, and also individually, I think, from the different schools that you're from, and also from the different areas and different areas and experiences you had in Cape Town, I think make for an interesting mix and should be a good conversation here. So I just we can open this up to anyone who wants to start first, but I want to begin with what your expectations were about studying in Cape Town, not necessarily visiting. But Michaela, maybe it is best to start with you, since yours was not necessarily about studying at UCT, but nevertheless studying in Cape Town.
Yeah, I think I had very minimal expectations because at least when I joined, the health, culture, and development program was brand new, I think, or like they had one semester before me. So I saw that there were 5 people in my program, and I did not expect us to have all of our classes, just the 5 of us. But I knew it was going to be a smaller knit group. And I saw from the list of classes that it was going to be a pretty focused semester on, well, the title is health, culture, and development. So on everything that has to do with that in the context of South Africa. And I think that was pretty much exactly what we got. You know, some of the courses were endemic diseases, power and protest, community and health, and all of that was very South African focused. And so I think it pretty much matched those expectations, but at the same time, there wasn't a lot to go off of. So it was pretty wide open going into it.
No, and in contrast to that, Carlos and Amir, you guys had a much more, I think, open-ended situation with UCT, or at least you were able to, you didn't necessarily have, and you certainly didn't have the same courses with the same 5 people. So I'm wondering, Amir, what were some of your expectations arriving in Cape Town in terms of the university and what you hope to get out of the academic semester?
Yeah, I would say some of my expectations, I would say I'll start off with just generally studying at the University of Cape Town. Honestly, I didn't expect to have a heavy workload, but I was soon, surprised when I actually did have a heavy workload. And I think it was really due to the courses I took. So at Howard University, I majored in business. So I took some of those courses there, and 2 of those courses, one was a financial management course, which was very demanding. And then I think another course, it was business law. So those were actually very important courses, which definitely were also, with regards to my scheme at Howard University, I needed to actually pass those courses in order to graduate. So I would say my expectations with regards to studying at the University of Cape Town, I didn't expect to have a heavy workload, but I ended up having a heavy workload, which, in my opinion, I actually really appreciated that at the end of the experience, because through that experience with being in a different educational environment, not only just university wide, but just, studying in a different country, there were a lot of benefits. And then I would say, I think the second part of the question was about the expectations for, what was the second part of the question? My apologies.
Yeah, the expectations for the University of Cape Town.
Okay, I would say, yeah, those were pretty much my expectations. I didn't expect to have a heavy workload, but I actually ended up having a heavy workload. Oh, that was the second part I wanted to answer. My other expectation was to learn a lot about the history of Cape Town. I actually did get that through one of the courses I enrolled, the community development course. So I was able to get that through that course.
Excellent. And Carlos, were you similarly not expecting a serious workload or a large workload?
Yeah, I was expecting for it to be pretty easy. I think, in my pride, the university I come from is a little rough. You spend the majority of your time doing work, or at least trying to do work. So when I heard about UCT and they said, oh, best school in Africa, workload's really hard, I'm like, sure, whatever. And then you take the classes and you realize it's actually quite challenging. The grading system being completely different, I actually favor, like to this day, I still prefer it. I think it's very accurate to the level of work that people should be putting out. But yeah, I was not expecting for it to be hard. I definitely think the way the courses were structured in terms of having like very few, well, at least for the courses that I took, very few assignments was really nice because you can spend, the majority of your time on those assignments. And I like, having 2 or 3 grades in a class because, assuming you do well, you're not turning things in every week. So that was really nice. The amount of reading that you had to do was manageable. I enjoyed the class structure. I just wasn't expecting it to be that hard,
I think that's something students often experience. I wonder if it's part of arriving as a study abroad student in that kind of context and the timeline that's involved with that, or if it's something about underestimating maybe universities, or like a university like the University of Cape Town. Michaela, I'm wondering if similarly with the kind of workload Amir and Carlos mentioned, if there was some of that with the HCD program that you experienced.
Just based off hearing that and I guess comparing with some of the friends during the same semester at UCT, we had much more, I wouldn't say maybe we had more work, but it was more like homework. Every, Monday or Wednesday things were due. So Carlos, you were saying like a couple assignments, and it wasn't exactly like that. And that's more similar to what I have here. So it wasn't that big of a shock for me. And I honestly didn't know what to expect, but I think it was similar to what I had at home. So I was able to manage it. There was a lot of reading to be done. So that I understand when you said that there's a lot of reading and you do have to put a lot of work into it. But I think, at least for the HCD program, if you're interested in the specifics of health, culture, and development, it didn't feel like busy work or, unmanageable content because it all felt very relevant and like current event type stuff. So it was different than any other semester course load than I've had before.
Carlos, you mentioned the grading scale, which is something that it causes a lot of anxiety when I mention this during the orientation program, because it is quite unusual in terms of the American way of doing grading. Michaela, you would have also seen this as well. I wonder, Carlos, if often students find that a challenge. You've enjoyed it, which I think is and have found value in it, which I think is really interesting, and it sheds light on just different ways of assessments. I'm wondering what were some challenges, specific challenges maybe that you encountered or faced, whether it was with the reading load or staying on top of academics while you were at UCT.
Yeah, so you're never ready for that first 60. It just sweeps your legs out. But it's definitely a good learning experience because, when you get that type of grade that's just so different than what you get in the American education system, you kind of have to reevaluate your life and you have to say, okay, I can keep getting 60s and just, have my morale plummet for the rest of the semester, or I can actually talk to the professor and figure out what just happened. So I think, this grading system of 80 being amazing, or not 80, what it was like 75 being an A. When you first hear, you're like, oh, this is easy. And then, you don't get a 75 for a while. But I like this scale. I mean, if you think about the American grading system, like a lot of people are used to A's, but this grading system is so nice because they're basically saying, we're not going to give you a 100 because, you're not a published author who's writing perfectly. You're literally not getting a 100 because a 100 is not something that you can achieve right now. And I think that's very good. Like, it doesn't coddle people. And I think that's really important because, when you graduate, if everyone's graduating with a 4.0, you're not special. And it's not the importance isn't getting the 4.0. The importance isn't getting the highest grade that you can. The importance is realizing where your work falls in terms of how professionals judge work. And I think that's really useful, especially when you start talking with some of the professionals, like the teachers, and learning, you know, how this person that's established themselves in academia really views your paper and how they think it can be better, whether that's grammar, whether that's syntax, whether that's the actual content of the paper. Like, it's really useful. And I think in the American education system, you know, you can slide by, well, I mean, sure, getting a 4.0 is hard, but you can slide by with a 4.0 and your skills don't increase. And like, that's really problematic. But you can't really do that at UCT. Like, you can slide by with 60s and your skills won't increase. But if you want higher grades, you really do, like, the education system improves you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it does kind of bring you back to reality a bit, or at least adjust your perspective about your work and your perception of it, and also other people's perceptions of it. Amir, does that ring a bell for you at all? The surprise of getting the first 60, or the grading system? Another thing students often say semester in and semester out is that the reading load is much more than they had anticipated. And also that the grading system, Carlos, you briefly touched on having 1 or 2, 3 assignments, if that was also a challenge or an adjustment to go through.
Yeah, I would say definitely everything Carlos said, it rung a lot of bells. And I remember having this conversation with you in the beginning of the semester, because I too was surprised, you know, when you get that first 60 or 70, God forbid, 50. So, so for me, you know, in the beginning, it definitely created anxiety, because I'm definitely, prior to studying at the University of Cape Town, I was one of those students who, you know, was straight A's, you know, I was inspired to be, you know, a straight A student. So when I saw a grade like that, as Carlos mentioned, it just causes you to go into, you know, some sort of reflection. But, you know, through that experience, though, by the end of the program, I actually really liked, you know, I actually loved the grading scale. I would say just how I interpreted the South African education system, I really agreed with, you know, the grading system and their approach to education, because I remember in one class, business law, even outside of, you know, your paper being graded, if you received, you know, if you got a question wrong, they would also deduct points. And so it really shows you what you know versus what you don't know. And I think that's definitely excellent education. I think it puts more emphasis on actually learning the material and engaging in that learning environment versus, oh, I'm thinking about this grade, I just need an A. That's all I want is an A to pass. It forces you to actually focus on what matters. And what matters really is the knowledge that you're gaining and the experience of that versus the grade itself. And so when I compare the two, I think of the American education system putting so much emphasis on, you know, grades. And then when I was in South Africa, just the way their grading system was organized and the way, you know, professors graded assignments, for my experience, it appeared to be more of the emphasis was actually based on the importance of learning and receiving that information and allowing yourself to grow within that environment. So I actually appreciated it by the end of the program. And I would say even before the end of the program, after I just did some reflection internally, but of course in the beginning, it definitely was something that I wasn't expecting. But after that period of time, I actually really grew to appreciate that experience, and I could see how it actually helped me even return back to America.
I think that's useful, and it's a good segue into the next question. And I because Amir, you spoke very eloquently about that. Now I think it's best for you to continue here about what were some rewards that you got out of studying at UCT. Now, each of you mentioned that the difference in grading and the kind of perspective that shifted for you. I'm wondering if there's rewards in terms of maybe dynamics between students, the kind of schedule you have for yourself, considering there are less assignments than there are in the American system, or any other rewards that you gained out of the experience as a whole.
Yeah, I would say as a whole, when I returned back home, I would say, so prior to studying abroad, I thought I was really good with time management as far as my assignments and things of that nature. But after, you know, experiencing the education in South Africa, you know, the different grading system, once I came back home, And I actually thought that I even, became even more independent in my learning. Because, I'm back home in the American education system, usually there's a syllabus, usually it's detailed in a way where I don't want to say your hand is being held, but your hand is being held. But when I was abroad, I noticed a lot of a few of the classes that I took, it was really up to you to really take your learning experience seriously, and more of the focus was put on you as a student, I would say. I hope that makes sense, but I would say when I returned home from studying abroad, just my overall experience with learning, I took more control of it, and I noticed there was a difference in the way, I just managed my not only time, but approach to the learning that I did. It was very much more efficient. And prior to studying abroad, I thought I was already efficient, but I would say a reward that I gained after studying abroad, the efficiency in my learning just increased even when I went back home. And there's actually research that was published around that too that I looked up. I don't want to take up too much time, but that was one of the rewards that I had after studying in Cape Town.
I think that's great, and any kind of shift in terms of your own time management is useful, because that's something that you use not only as a student but as a human being in everyday life. Carlos, I saw you nodding along with some of the points Amir raised about time management and just kind of getting a sense of being more independent and taking ownership of your learning. Is that something you found at Case Western once you returned, or even more broadly in your own life once you've been back?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I found. Case has a program where you can start graduate school early. So your senior year, you can take grad classes. And I mean, if you take 10 of them in 1 year, which is just, 5 classes per semester, then you get a master's degree. So me and 7 or 6 other people in my discipline did that. So jumping from, spring semester of junior year to fall semester of grad school, is not something that I'd recommend to anyone. But I think, Cape Town being like that spring semester was really useful, because the amount of reading that you do in graduate school is absurd. You can't read everything, even if you wanted to. And in certain classes, the amount of reading that you have to do at UCT is absurd. You can't read everything, even if you wanted to. So, people talk about skimming and, reading through articles quickly, but you really nail down those skills, or at least being at UCT helped me nail down those skills at UCT, so that when I started grad school, I wasn't stressed out of my mind trying to figure out, if every class is assigning me 200 pages and I have 5 classes, I can't read all that stuff at once. But I'm not saying UCT was like the practice for grad school, but I mean, in hindsight, I see it as that. Like, it was really good prep work to prepare me to the amount of reading, to the amount of work that I have to do. And they really do mimic each other in terms of the amount of reading that you have to do and like the type of assignments that you do. Because in grad school, you're not, handing in assignments every week, maybe some classes. But at least for me, I might have had 3 assignments over the semester and maybe like 6 or 8 over the year. So you really learn how to focus and, like Amir said, self-manage your time, the amount of reading that you do, the things that you write about. If you're doing thesis work or something like that, it has to be self-regimented. So UCT helps with that because there's so few assignments. So you have to take that initiative, or else you're going to be pulling a couple all-nighters before you have to turn in the assignment, and no one wants to do that.
No one wants to, and no one should, because getting 8 hours of sleep is very important. Now, Michaela, with the HCD program, you've mentioned that there was the 5 classes that were also quite regimented, had quite a lot of reading. I'm wondering perhaps if also the other elements of the program, the course-related trips, the out-of-the-classroom experiences, if any of those have translated into some kind of reward in your life or something with regards to your academic career.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so in addition to all of our courses, we had these class-related trips, and I think we probably had one every week almost, for each 5 of our courses. And they would take us to different NGOs or local clinics or hospitals or things like that to get actual experience with what we were learning in the classroom. And so I felt like we had the most experiential learning I think I've ever experienced. And when I came back, I was absolutely craving that. I think that led me to pursue much more purposeful courses, coursework. I study psychology as my major, and when I came back, taking the most general psychology courses really frustrated me, to be honest. Like the first semester coming back, I was like, this is not the important content that I want to be studying. Like I want to be studying global health and going out and seeing the things that I got the opportunity to see in Cape Town. So I think it led me to pursue. Now I picked up an Africana Studies minor, hoping to get some of those same experiences. Led me to pursue this like massive documentary course that I'm excited about, but gives me similar purpose, I guess, and intention. Like all of those small experiences in Cape Town gave me that, you know, the education system here, especially in college, lacks completely. So yeah, definitely those were some of the most influential experiences. You know, when we got to actually get outside of the classroom, I think that's what made our program so special in general.
I wonder then, Michaela, to follow up, if there were any surprises about your experience with whether it's academics, but also the academic related components. And by surprise, I don't necessarily mean necessarily that you weren't expecting it to go on a certain trip or to go to a certain organization, but if you were surprised at all by what you got out of the experience, or upon reflecting about it, if there's anything that you found that you've actually thought, you know what, I never thought about that before, but it's driven me to this thing, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that comes to mind is the fact that we were so focused on South Africa, and that was amazing, and I loved it. And we learned like all of the historical elements and the healthcare and like so many details about South Africa that I wasn't expecting. And then as soon as I came home, I realized that I lacked so much of that about the United States. And I think that was really surprising for me, and gave me a lot of I don't know, momentum, I guess, to figure that out as soon as I got home. And I was not expecting that at all, to kind of feel like this lack of understanding of where I live, and you know, the education system that I live in, and the historical elements that have, you know, really created the systems that I live in. So there was definitely a shock moment coming back of, I don't know enough about the United States, and I was definitely not expecting that coming from a semester abroad. So.
And Amir or Carlos, I think either of you could, I don't have necessarily someone in mind here, but if you guys similarly feel that you had an experience along those lines where maybe you were more turned towards the United States coming back, or the experience of being in South Africa made you want to reorient your focus to something else, or to maybe enhance what you were focusing on already, or perhaps try something completely new.
Yeah, I think for me, the semester before I studied abroad, I took a lot of African American studies courses. My university didn't have a minor in African American studies or African studies until that year. So that's an entirely different conversation. But I declared the minor as soon as they offered it, and I was taking classes in it and such. So the contrast between, like, among other things, Jim Crow and like apartheid is wild. It's interesting to see how the two systems are so similar, but also how apartheid was just so much more systematic. But I mean, when you learn about that history, it's useful. The challenge is, what do you do with that information, you know? So I think in the US, you know, people don't, I mean, up until maybe this year, people don't really have a lot of conversations about race, about like systematic issues. If they are conversations, they're very polarized or one-sided. That doesn't really, at least in my experience, that didn't really happen when I was in Cape Town, especially not at UCT. You know, as soon as you speak, people hear your accent and say, "Oh, you're American. You know, what do you think about Donald Trump?" And I'm like, okay, we're going here now. But it was so good because you can talk about, you know, all these things that in America people don't want to talk about. People don't want to talk about religion. They don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk about race. You know, any demographic characteristic that has wide disparities we just stray away from, unless something really bad happens, like someone gets shot. But you don't have that at UCT, and I mean, you don't have that more broadly in Cape Town, and it was really useful to have those conversations, but also address it on an academic level and really dive into, this is the system, this is what we know about it, this is what we don't know about it, this is how it's kind of unreversible if you're being pessimistic, if you're being hopeful, these are the next steps forward. And it's good to have those conversations consistently. Because in the US, something bad happens and people will talk about changing the system, and then a week passes and something different happens and we stop talking about changing the system. At UCT, or at least in the classes, if you're repeatedly having conversations inside and outside of class about this is the system that we have for now, and these are potential avenues that we can take to improve it or tear it down if it's bad, it's useful. It makes you think differently about the world.
Amir, following in that vein, did you find yourself surprised at all about how you thought about the United States returning home, or how you felt being there, or in addition to other surprises you might have had while studying in Cape Town?
Yeah, so this is like a really good question, and I agreed with a lot of the points. Michaela, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and Carlos, I agreed with a lot of the points they made. So I'm trying to sum up my response because their responses really just sparked a lot of memories. But I guess I would start with, being originally from Buffalo, New York in America. So my school, Howard University, is a historically Black college located in Washington, D.C. And I've always, and I say that to say I've always had an interest in learning more about Black history and African affairs. And so when I had my freshman year at Howard, my goal, I actually wrote on a vision board my freshman year to study abroad in Africa. I didn't care which country it was, but I did want to study abroad in an African country. So leading up to my experience in Cape Town, I was always interested in, studying abroad and going to visit Africa. I didn't care which country it was. So then upon my arrival, I would say based on, whatever interpretations or thoughts I had about America, it was just interesting to, step outside of America and then view that, from the lens of not being inside of America, but outside of America. And then as, Carlos and Michaela mentioned, just the experience there, I noticed, a lot of the deep conversations and that I think are necessary and that we should be having in America, you're not necessarily having. And so I was, very surprised when I got to Cape Town and it wasn't something that was so, shocking. It wasn't something that, people were walking on eggshells around or afraid to address the quote unquote elephant in the room. They were very open to that discourse. And I remember in one of my philosophy classes, it was, we talked about racism. It was in a philosophy class and we were talking about racism, but I remember, as Carlos mentioned, as soon as you speak, people, they understand, they hear you have an accent, they know you're not from there. And I remember when I spoke, they were also interested in what I had to say about racism, what I had to say about racism in the context of America. And so for me, that was very surprising. So then that only, it just really made me view America even more differently than what I had already viewed it before. It made me reflect on how, while I was in South Africa, it felt as if people, and in my experience, we were focusing on what really matters. And that wasn't something I was getting when I was in America. I wrote down something else here. Oh, when I was in South Africa, something else I would say that I was inspired to do when I came back is to just research more consistently about world history, global history. When I went there, I was just very bothered by the fact that the American education system, it doesn't place enough emphasis on learning about different countries, learning about the international world. And I think it's associated with America being, quote unquote, the country to be. We are, a country that everyone aspires to be. So there's no interest shown in learning about other countries, other cultures, people from other backgrounds. And while I was there, I noticed the students I met, they were very knowledgeable about world events, very knowledgeable about things that were going on. And it really just caused me to reflect on my own experience in America. So that inspired me just to continue that research upon coming back. And then I think that was everything I had. So I hope I answered your question. I just jotted down a few notes while everyone else was, while Michaela and Carlos were talking, but I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Each of you did very well, and with specific, experiences of your own. I think the way an academic environment can facilitate the kind of topic you guys and themes that the three of you have engaged with and spoken about, I think is really interesting, because it is a conversation or a topic, I guess, that requires a mixture of an informal conversation with that formal backing, I think, that a classroom offers, or that the structure of a syllabus and a lecture offers. And I think it's really interesting for me, I mean, being an American as well, to hear how you guys have thought about this returning back to the US and kind of not reassimilating, but getting back into your routine and getting back into your to your situation. I've just got one more question for you guys about what you think one thing future students who are interested in either the DE program or in Michaela, your case, the HCD program, what is one thing students should keep in mind when they're thinking about studying at UCT? And Carlos, we can just start with you.
Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. Just accept it. There's a lot of uncomfortable interactions you're going to have when you're shopping. There's a lot of uncomfortable interactions you're going, or at least let's use a different word, new. We could say new or foreign. All of it's new. If you're not okay with that, you might need to reconsider studying abroad. But literally, every place that you go to is new. Every person that you talk to is new. Everything that you do there is new. And the significance of that is, I mean, sure, it gives you a chance to, reinvent yourself, but more fundamentally, it's a constant learning experience. And if you view it as that, it's really helpful. If you view it pessimistically and say, oh my gosh, I have to deal with these people. Oh my gosh, I have to figure out this thing that I don't know how to do. Studying abroad is going to be really stressful. And you even just might not like it or go home early. But when you step into the experience that is studying abroad, you're going to learn a lot. And as long as you orient your mind that way, you come out with so much. And I think that was one of the biggest things for me, because, every day, every class, every conversation, there's an opportunity to learn something. And then when you come back to the US, it's not that that feeling goes away. It's that hopefully you keep that mindset. So, instead of returning to the US and saying, all right, my family's here, my friends are here, the corner store down the street is here, I know where everything is. It's a matter of, no, I can still learn something from these interactions. And that's a fundamentally different way of looking at the world. And I think it's a really beneficial way to look at the world, but it's also, in my opinion, like a better way of looking at the world. Because now, everything that you're doing, every person that you're talking to, it's not necessarily you'll get something out of it, but it makes you critically think, and it sharpens your mind and, at minimum, your analytical abilities, just because you're kind of sifting through all of the information that you go through on a day-to-day basis.
Now, Amir, Carlos mentioned that things were new, which I think is good. Everything is new, and that can be uncomfortable, as Carlos mentioned, but it also can, as he mentioned, have a lot of beautiful potential, and it can help you learn and kind of readjust how you engage with people, places, institutions. I'm wondering, Amir, what you think one thing future students interested in studying at University of Cape Town should keep in mind.
One thing I would say, I think future students who are interested in studying abroad in Cape Town would be to take calculated risks and move past any fear that you may feel on the inside. And I think everything else in your experience will fall under that umbrella. Take calculated risk. I won't say take a risk. It should be calculated, in my opinion. But don't be afraid in other words, don't be afraid of the experience. As Carlo mentioned, there will be some new, like you mentioned, you'll have new experiences. Some of them may make you feel uncomfortable, but embrace, being uncomfortable. That's where you will grow the most. I would say my response would be to one thing I think future students should keep in mind, when deciding to study abroad, is to take calculated risks and, move past any fear that they may experience. And under that broad comment, I would just add, I think it would be really, really good to take a service learning course. The experiential learning aspect of my experience only enhanced my experience by that much more. I think my experience without taking, the community development course would have been exceptional regardless, but taking that course, it just took it to newer heights that it wouldn't have gone to if I didn't take that course. So I would say take service learning, participate in a service learning initiative. I would also say seek any opportunities to grow, stretch yourself as much as possible, and everything will be okay. I think definitely just seeking any new opportunities to grow and not being afraid of being uncomfortable, you'll definitely have the best experience ever.
I think that's great advice. Michaela, we can end with you, which I think is fitting because the HCD program is for students who are interested in studying in Cape Town, but not necessarily at UCT. So I'm wondering what you think one thing future students interested in that experience in an HCD should keep in mind.
The first thing that came to mind with that one would be to not be afraid to immerse yourself in more of the local community, because I think oftentimes, at least in my experience, the HCD program can kind of find comfort in our little bubble of 5 students, and our classes are in the center, in the IES Center, which is about a 30-second walk from our apartment. So if you don't try that hard, it's easy to stay in that same small little bubble with the same people, same professors, and not get a lot of exposure to, some of the local students or campus or other activities that they offer. And so I think looking back, that's something I wish I did a little bit more. I know in the beginning of the semester, they offer, I think, like club sports, or like they give you an opportunity to join. And I regret not doing that, because I think a lot of the students in the direct enroll program had more of that exposure, being in a classroom with local Cape Townians and things like that. So I think for this program specifically, that's the biggest thing I would say. But I echo everything else that was said about being finding comfort in being uncomfortable, because that's something that definitely took a bit of an adjustment. You hear, a bunch of stereotypes or things about what it's going to be like. And part of it is to be uncomfortable, and that's part of the learning curve. So I would just say, don't be afraid of that, and enjoy it, because it goes by really fast.
I think that's also great advice. I want to thank each of you for joining to participate and offering some insights and sharing your experiences. It's been fantastic to hear from them. It's also been great to see you guys, and I hope you're all, you and your families are doing well, and are having a good time, and everything is going well. So with that, thanks once again, guys. I will be in touch once we have this kind of packaged and edited and whatnot, and once it's kind of available as a piece of content to view. And if you guys had any questions in the meantime or going forward, please just don't hesitate to reach out. And yeah, thanks once again, guys. It was really great seeing you, and I really, again, I sincerely hope you're all doing well.
Thanks. It was nice meeting you too.
Thank you as well.
Okay. Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
have a good evening. Bye.